So let's get into it because we've got a lot of things to cover and a lot of people to talk to. We're not quite into spring yet, and particularly we're in Montreal, and we've got still the tail end of a cold spell. Little thaw started to show up today, and we've got the whole east coast of the United States is like locked down with a storm. I don't know if we're going to get hit with that or not. So we're working our way out of winter. What happens though right now are flooding. There's all kinds of different floods that you need to be prepared for. So I want to talk for just a minute about water in your basement in the springtime. And it happens for a bunch of reasons in the spring and not the rest of the year. One of the reasons for a lot of people that don't even live near a river or anything else is that the ground is frozen, the snow is melting, the rain hits on top, none of that goes anywhere. It follows the flow of the land. And if the flow of the land is towards your house, then it puts a lot of stress of water on the foundation. So that gets into a serious problem of overloading what will work most of the rest of the year. Now, sometimes you have a perfect system and it can handle anything. But in many houses, we get into some minor water problems. Sometimes it's more and could lead to mold. So you really want to pay attention to it. If you go to my website and look up landscaping, because that's what we're really talking about, there's an interesting article I have called about trench drains for drainage in the yard around the house. And I just like this picture here because it sort of exaggerates it in this 3D graphic. But it shows you that if you have a pond, you have a slope where the water is coming towards the house, well, you want a landscape, and this exaggerates so you can see it clearly, but you want to send the water around the house, the same way you do when you dig a trench around a tent and you're on a hillside. And you don't want the water coming down the hillside into the tent, you send it around. So landscaping is what takes care of 80% of all wet and basement problems. So it's really a useful thing to get in and do. Make sure that your downspouts come down and flow away. In this case, where they couldn't float away anywhere, they set up what we call a dry well, which is a space for temporary storage water that will then percolate into the soil. So it takes a rush of rain and absorbs it and then gets rid of it slowly. But the slope of the land is critical as you're doing that. Last year in Montreal, we had a lot bigger problems, and particularly even in the summertime where the river came up and we had serious flooding. We get this across the country in Winnipeg and other places. So I've also got an article in here that specifically designed to deal with that I wrote just last year. Here you can see it's called The River's Rising, Preparing for a Flood, if you just look up flood or even overview. And it is really interesting because what you really need to know here is if you have just a few inches of water, your plumbing drains are probably totally blocked and your heating system may need to be shut down. We're starting to get into trouble, even with just a few inches of water in the basement. Now, if you get a few feet of water, well, once the water rises up high enough to touch an electrical outlet, you're in phase 2. And that means the power goes out in the house. Okay, or at least all the power in the basement or anything that could get anywhere near the water, and stays out until an electrician can check it after the flood. So now that's a critical different phase. You could still live in the house, but you've got no water drainage and you've got no electricity, at least not in the lower part of the house. And when the water reaches the electrical panel, that's stage 3, and stage 3, it's over. When the water gets that high, there's no electricity in the house. That panel needs to be shut off if it hasn't already blown itself out. And you don't want to be walking around in water to shut that off. You need to think ahead of time. If it's going to get critical like that, get it shut off early. Never do it with your hand. You do it with a wooden stick or a fiberglass stick or something. You don't want to touch the electrical panel when there's a lot of water around. So those are like 3 phases. And then you get in. And there's a whole story here about the priorities: electrical, gas and oil, plumbing, pumping, and then restoration. That's all when you're getting a flood. That's more than just a little water in the basement. You're really getting flooding. But the best part of it is if you read this ahead of time. It's when the water's rising, you're in panic mode and you don't really want to go study a website. It's the time to know what your plan of action is, know how you can hold things off, how long you can stay, and when is the appropriate time to simply get out. Okay?